When I find you both, death will separate you much faster than you thought.
My wife just told me she's taking a 2-week break from our marriage to go on a trip with another man, and when she comes back, our marriage will be stronger than before. I stared at Emily across our granite kitchen island, wondering if I'd finally lost my mind, or if she had. The coffee mug in my hand felt like the only solid thing in a world that had just tilted sideways. Emily Masters stood there in her real estate blazer, perfectly put together as always, her blonde hair catching the morning light streaming through our suburban Dallas windows. At 35, she still turned heads, still had that smile that could sell a house to someone who wasn't even looking to buy. But right now, that smile looked like it belonged on a stranger. "Kyle, you're not listening," she said, her voice taking on that patient tone she used with difficult clients. "Dr. Heller says that sometimes marriages need space to grow. This isn't about Troy. Well, not entirely. It's about me finding myself." Troy. The name hung in the air like a bad smell. Troy Baxter, the so-called entrepreneur with the flashy Porsche, and the kind of confidence that came from never having to work a real job. I'd met him twice at Emily's real estate events, and both times he'd looked at me like I was the help. "Let me get this straight," I said, setting down my mug with deliberate care. "Your therapist, who I've never met, by the way, thinks the best way to strengthen our marriage is for you to go on vacation with the guy you've been texting at all hours? It's not like that." Emily's cheeks flushed, but she held my gaze. "Troy understands the pressure I'm under. The real estate market is brutal right now, and you're always buried in your computers. When was the last time we really talked?" I could have pointed out that I'd tried talking to her every day for the past 6 months, only to get one-word answers and the back of her head as she scrolled through her phone. I could have mentioned the mysterious credit card bills, the weekend trips to Las Vegas with her friend Kim, or the way she'd started wearing new jewelry I'd never seen before. Instead, I asked, "What about Sophie and Jenna?" "They'll be fine. You're great with them." She grabbed her purse from the counter, the same designer bag she'd somehow afforded on a real estate agent's commission in a down market. "I'll be back in 2 weeks. We can talk then." "Emily, wait." But she was already heading for the door, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a countdown timer. I heard her BMW start up in the driveway, heard it pull away, and then there was nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my 10-year-old daughter Sophie calling from upstairs. "Dad? Where's Mom going with her suitcase?" I stood there for a moment, looking at the kitchen that had been the heart of our home for 8 years. The family photos on the refrigerator, the crayon drawings from Jenna, the calendar with soccer practices and school events marked in Emily's neat handwriting. Everything looked the same, but something fundamental had shifted. My name is Kyle Masters, and I'm 39 years old. I manage IT systems for a mid-sized accounting firm, which means I solve problems for a living. I fix things that are broken, find solutions that other people miss, and I'm very good at it. But as I stood in my kitchen that Tuesday morning, I realized I was facing a problem I'd never encountered before. My wife had just announced she was cheating on me, and she expected me to be grateful for her honesty. Sophie appeared in the doorway, her brown hair messy from sleep, wearing the oversized Rangers t-shirt she'd claimed from my dresser. At 10, she was already showing signs of inheriting Emily's looks and my stubborn streak. "Mom said she was going on a business trip," Sophie said, but her voice carried a question. "Something like that," I replied, because what else could I say? Your mother is having a midlife crisis and decided to handle it like a teenager? 8-year-old Jenna bounced into the kitchen next, all energy and gap-toothed grins. "Can we have pancakes? Mom said no sugar cereal, but she's not here, so technically, pancakes it is," I said, grateful for the distraction. "But you still have to eat some fruit." As I mixed batter and listened to my daughters chatter about school and friends and the injustice of bedtimes, I tried to process what had just happened. Emily wasn't just having an affair, she was flaunting it. She'd asked for my permission to cheat, wrapped it up in therapy speak, and expected me to smile and wave goodbye. The thing is, I'm not the kind of guy who makes scenes. I don't throw punches or smash dishes or storm out in dramatic fashion. I analyze problems, gather data, and find solutions. So while Sophie and Jenna ate their pancakes and argued about who got the last strawberry, I was already making plans. Emily thought she was dealing with the same Kyle who'd spent 8 years avoiding conflict, who'd rather work late than fight about money, who'd pretended not to notice when she started coming home from her girls' nights, smelling like cologne that wasn't mine. She was wrong about that. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek Holloway, my friend since college and the closest thing I had to a brother. Derek had been a cop for 15 years before going private, and he had the kind of cynical worldview that came from seeing too much human nature. Coffee later. Sarah's driving me crazy with wedding planning. I texted back. Rain check. Emily just left for Vegas with her boyfriend. Need to figure some things out. My phone rang immediately. She did what now? Derek's voice carried the same tone he'd used when we were 22, and I'd told him I was going to marry Emily after knowing her for 6 months. Long story. Can you come over tonight after the girls are in bed? I'll bring beer and my laptop. We're going to figure out exactly who this Troy a-hole is. That was Derek. Straight to the point, ready for action. It's why he'd made detective before 30, and why his private investigation business was thriving. After I hung up, I realized Sophie was watching me with the kind of careful attention that meant she'd heard more than I'd intended. Dad, are you and Mom getting divorced? The question hit me like a physical blow. I sat down at the table across from my daughters, these two perfect little humans who deserved better than having their world turned upside down because their mother had decided marriage was too hard. I don't know, sweetheart, I said, because I'd always promised to be honest with them. But whatever happens, you and Jenna are the most important thing in the world to me. That will never change. Sophie nodded solemnly, already too grown up for 10. Jenna, bless her, was more interested in building a fort out of her pancakes than parsing the adult drama swirling around her. I spent the rest of the day going through the motions. Work, school pickup, homework supervision, dinner, baths, bedtime stories. Normal Tuesday activities in a life that no longer felt normal. But underneath the routine, my mind was working, cataloging details I'd ignored for months. The credit card bills Emily had started handling herself, the new clothes that appeared in her closet, the way she'd become protective of her phone, taking it with her to the bathroom, sleeping with it under her pillow. The weekend trips to Vegas that had started as occasional girls' getaways and become monthly events. By the time Derek arrived at 9 o'clock, I had a list. Derek Holloway looked like exactly what he was, an ex-cop who'd seen enough of the world's ugliness to develop a permanent squint and a 3-day stubble that somehow never became a full beard. At 41, he was 2 years older than me, and about 20 years more cynical. He also happened to be the most loyal friend I'd ever had. So, he said, settling into my living room couch with a beer and his laptop. Tell me about Prince Charming. I handed him the list I'd compiled. Troy Baxter claims to be an entrepreneur. Drives a red Porsche 911, probably 2020 or newer. Emily met him at some real estate networking event about 6 months ago. He's been to our house twice for parties. Both times acted like he owned the place. Derek was already typing. Troy Baxter, Dallas area. Let's see what the internet knows about our boy. His fingers flew across the keyboard with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years running background checks. Here we go. Troy Baxter, age 41, registered address in Uptown Dallas. No traditional employment records, but he's got an LLC called Baxter Ventures. What kind of ventures? The kind that don't seem to venture into anything specific. Derek's screen reflected off his glasses as he scrolled. No employees listed, no business license for anything concrete. But he's got a nice social media presence. Look at this. He turned the laptop toward me. Troy's Instagram was a highlight reel of expensive restaurants, luxury cars, and what appeared to be a steady stream of vacations. In several recent photos, I could see a familiar blonde figure just at the edge of the frame. Emily's been documenting their relationship, I said, feeling sick. Not just that. Derek clicked through to Troy's Facebook page. Look at the pattern. Every few months, there's a new woman in his photos. Always attractive, always looks like she has money, and they all seem to disappear after a while. I studied the screen, seeing a timeline of relationships that followed the same arc. Initial photos of romantic dinners and weekend getaways, followed by increasingly expensive activities, then nothing. The women just vanished from his social media presence. He's a professional boyfriend, I said. That's my read. Question is, what's he getting out of it? Emily makes decent money, but she's not rich. That's when I remembered something that had been nagging at me. Derek, can you look up gambling records? Emily's been going to Vegas a lot lately. Not legally, but I know a guy. Derek made a note on his phone. What makes you think gambling? She's been weird about money. We've got separate accounts for discretionary spending, but she's been asking to borrow from the joint account more often. Always has a reason. Car repair, client dinner, new work clothes. But I saw a receipt in her purse last month for a jewelry store in Las Vegas. $1,500. Derek whistled low. That's not girls' weekend money. We spent the next 2 hours building a profile of my wife's secret life. Derek had contacts in places I didn't want to think about too hard, and by midnight, we had a clearer picture of what Emily had been doing. The gambling was real. Derek's guy at one of the major Vegas casinos confirmed that Emily had been a regular for the past 4 months, usually arriving on Friday nights and leaving Sunday afternoons. Her credit was good, but she'd been playing at higher stakes tables recently. "Here's the interesting part," Derek said, showing me a printout. "She's not losing consistently. Actually, she's been on a pretty good streak. Won about 12 grand in the last 2 months. Then why is she always short on cash? That's the question, isn't it?" Derek leaned back, studying the information we'd gathered. "Kyle, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer. How well do you really know your wife?" It was a fair question. Emily and I had met when I was 28 and she was 24. She'd been working at a marketing firm then, ambitious and driven, the kind of woman who knew exactly what she wanted from life. We dated for 2 years before getting married, and in that time she'd been an open book. Or so I'd thought. "I thought I knew her completely," I said. "But these past few months, it's like she's become a different person. More secretive, more distant, always on her phone, always busy with work or friends." "When did it start?" I thought about it. "Around the time she started seeing Dr. Heller, Emily said she wanted to work on herself, become more independent. I thought it was great. I've always supported her career ambitions." Derek made another note. "We need to know more about this therapist. In my experience, when someone suddenly starts keeping secrets, there's usually more than one secret involved." The next morning, I went through my normal routine, but everything felt different. Dropping Sophie and Jenna at school, I found myself wondering how many other parents were dealing with marriages that had become elaborate performances. How many of the couples at soccer games and school events were just pretending everything was fine? At work, I threw myself into a server migration project, grateful for problems that had clear solutions. But around lunchtime, I got a text from Emily. "Having a wonderful time. The weather is perfect. Hope you and the girls are doing well." It was the kind of generic message you'd send to a distant relative, not your husband of 8 years. But it confirmed she was in Vegas, probably with Troy, probably spending money we didn't have on whatever fantasy she'd convinced herself was more important than our family. I was about to put my phone away when another message came through. This one from Kim Valdez, Emily's best friend and frequent Vegas companion. "Hey Kyle, is everything okay? Emily seemed really stressed when she left. Just want to make sure you guys are good." Kim's concern felt genuine, but it also felt like fishing. Emily had clearly told her something, but not everything. I decided to test the waters. "She's been under a lot of pressure lately," I replied. "The real estate market is tough right now. I think this trip will be good for her." Kim's response came quickly. "Yeah, she mentioned she needed space to think. I told her Vegas isn't really the place for soul searching, but you know Emily when she gets an idea in her head." Interesting. So, Kim didn't know about Troy, or she was pretending not to know. Either way, it suggested Emily was compartmentalizing her secrets, which meant there might be more people who could provide pieces of the puzzle. That evening, after the girls were in bed, I called Derek. "I've been thinking about what you said about Emily keeping multiple secrets. What if the gambling and Troy are connected somehow?" "How do you mean?" "What if Troy isn't just a boyfriend? What if he's involved in whatever she's doing in Vegas?" Derek was quiet for a moment. "Kyle, I need to ask you something, and I want you to consider it carefully. How far are you willing to go to find out the truth?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, once we start pulling threads, we might not like what we find. Are you prepared for the possibility that Emily isn't just having an affair? That there might be something bigger going on?" I thought about my daughters, asleep upstairs in their beds, trusting that their parents would protect them and provide for them. I thought about the house we'd bought together, the life we'd built, the future we'd planned. "I need to know," I said. "Whatever it is, I need to know." "Okay then, pack a bag. We're going to Vegas." The flight to Las Vegas gave me 3 hours to think about what we might find, and by the time we landed at McCarran, I'd imagined every possible scenario from simple infidelity to elaborate con games. The reality, as Derek had warned me, was worse than anything I'd pictured. We checked into a hotel on the Strip, close enough to the major casinos to do reconnaissance, but far enough from Emily's usual haunts to avoid accidental encounters. Derek had contacts at 3 different properties, and within 2 hours of arriving, We had Emily's location. She's at the Bellagio, Derek said, hanging up from a conversation with a casino host he'd known since his police days. Been there since yesterday, staying in a suite that runs about $800 a night. She's not alone. Troy? That's what we're going to find out. The Bellagio on a Thursday evening was a study in controlled chaos. Tourists mixed with serious gamblers, servers navigated through crowds carrying drinks and chips, and somewhere in the middle of it all was my wife, living a life I'd never imagined. Derek had arranged for us to observe from the casino's security office, a favor that had cost him a bottle of very expensive whiskey and a promise to consult on a case involving insurance fraud. The security chief, a former FBI agent named Martinez, led us to a room filled with monitors showing every angle of the casino floor. Your wife's been a regular, Martinez said, pulling up footage from the previous evening. High roller section usually plays blackjack and poker. She's good, better than most tourists. But lately, she's been playing differently. On the screen, I watched Emily at a blackjack table, but she wasn't alone. Troy sat beside her, and they seemed to be working together, signaling each other in ways that looked casual but followed a pattern. They're counting cards, Derek said. More than that, Martinez replied. Watch this. He switched to a different camera angle, showing Troy at a nearby slot machine. As Emily played blackjack, Troy was watching other players, occasionally texting on his phone. He's gathering information, tracking betting patterns, identifying marks. Marks for what? Martinez pulled up more footage, this time from earlier in the week. Your wife and her friend have been running a sophisticated operation. She plays cards and wins legitimately, but he's been setting up side games with other tourists. Private poker games in hotel rooms, with stakes that go way beyond what the casino allows. I watched my wife of 8 years facilitate what was essentially a con game, using her charm and apparent innocence to lure wealthy tourists into private games where the odds were rigged against them. It was brilliant, illegal, and completely unlike the Emily I thought I knew. How much money are we talking about? I asked. In the past 2 months, probably close to $50,000, maybe more. Derek and I exchanged glances. That was more than Emily made in a year selling real estate. And it explained where the new jewelry and designer clothes had come from. It also explained why she'd been so eager to take regular trips to Vegas. There's something else, Martinez said, switching to a different set of monitors. They're not just running games here. Look at this. The new footage showed Emily and Troy in what appeared to be a hotel room, but they weren't alone. A camera was set up on a tripod, and they were clearly filming something. The angle didn't show everything, but it was obvious what kind of content they were creating. They're making adult videos, Martinez said matter-of-factly. High-end stuff, probably selling to private clients. The hotel room is registered under a fake name, but we've tracked it back to your wife's credit card. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The woman I'd married, the mother of my children, was not only running illegal gambling operations, but also selling intimate videos of herself online. And she'd wrapped it all up in therapy speak about needing space to find herself. Kyle, Derek said quietly, we should go. But I couldn't move. I stared at the monitors, watching Emily laugh at something Troy said, watching her touch his arm in a gesture that was both intimate and calculated. This wasn't a woman having a midlife crisis. This was a woman who'd been living a double life for months, maybe longer. Mr. Masters, Martinez said, I need to ask, did you know any of this? Nothing, I said. I knew she was gambling, but I thought it was just weekend fun with her girlfriends. I had no idea about the rest. Martinez nodded sympathetically. In my experience, spouses are usually the last to know. But you should also know that what they're doing isn't just morally questionable, it's illegal. The private gambling operation could result in federal charges, and the video business has tax implications they probably haven't considered. Derek was already making notes on his phone. Martinez, if someone were to report this activity, what would happen? The gambling operation would be shut down immediately. The video business would be investigated by both local police and the IRS. Depending on what else they find, your wife and her partner could be looking at serious jail time. I thought about Sophie and Jenna, about what it would mean for them to have their mother arrested. But I also thought about the life Emily had been living, the risks she'd been taking with our family's security and reputation. I need some air, I said. Derek followed me out of the casino and onto the strip, where the neon lights and crowds of tourists felt surreal after what we'd just learned. We walked in silence for several blocks before either of us spoke. Kyle, you know what you have to do. Do I? Because right now, I'm not sure of anything. Your wife isn't just cheating on you. She's committing crimes that could destroy your family's future. If she gets arrested, what happens to your daughters? What happens to your house, your savings, your reputation? Derek was right, but the magnitude of Emily's deception was still sinking in. The woman I'd shared a bed with for 8 years, who'd helped me raise 2 children, who'd been my partner in building a life together, had been systematically lying to me about everything. There's something else, Derek said, stopping at a crosswalk. Martinez didn't say this directly, but I got the impression that Emily and Troy aren't the only ones involved. This operation is too sophisticated for 2 amateurs. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that your wife might be in deeper than she realizes. Professional con artists don't usually partner with suburban real estate agents unless there's something bigger at stake. We spent the rest of the evening gathering more information. Derek's network of contacts in Vegas was impressive, and by midnight we had a clearer picture of what Emily had gotten herself into. Troy Baxter wasn't just a charming entrepreneur. He was a professional grifter with connections to organized crime families in 3 states. The private gambling operation was part of a larger network that laundered money through fake businesses and offshore accounts. Emily wasn't just his girlfriend. She was his latest recruit in a sophisticated criminal enterprise. The good news, Derek said as we sat in our hotel room reviewing everything we'd learned, is that Emily is probably not the mastermind. She's being used, which means she might be able to get out of this with minimal legal consequences. And the bad news? The bad news is that Troy and his associates don't usually let people just walk away. Once you're in, you're in. I stared at the ceiling, trying to process everything. 24 hours ago, my biggest problem had been a cheating wife. Now I was dealing with organized crime, money laundering, and the possibility that Emily was in actual physical danger. Derek, what would you do? If this were Sarah, what would you do? Derek was quiet for a long time. I'd protect my family first, worry about everything else second. But Kyle, you need to understand, this isn't just about your marriage anymore. This is about keeping your daughters safe. He was right. Whatever Emily had gotten herself into, whatever choices she'd made, Sophie and Jenna were innocent. They deserved a father who would protect them, even if it meant making impossible decisions about their mother. Okay, I said. What's the plan? We flew back to Dallas the next morning, but I felt like I was returning to a different city. A different life. Everything looked the same. The suburban streets, the familiar landmarks, the house where I'd lived for 8 years. But I was seeing it all through the lens of what I now knew about Emily's secret world. Derek dropped me off at home with a promise to compile everything we'd learned into a comprehensive report. You're going to need documentation for what comes next, he said. Whatever you decide to do, make sure you can prove everything. The house felt empty without Emily's presence, but also somehow cleaner, as if her absence had removed a layer of deception that had been polluting the air. Sophie and Jenna were at school, which gave me time to think about how to handle the next phase of this nightmare. Emily had texted twice during our Vegas trip, both messages maintaining the fiction that she was on some kind of therapeutic retreat. Feeling so much clearer about everything, read the most recent one. Can't wait to come home and start fresh. The irony was almost funny. She was planning to come home and start fresh, but she had no idea that I now knew about her criminal activities, her affair, and her complete betrayal of everything we'd built together. My phone rang around noon. Emily's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering, but I needed to hear her voice, needed to see if I could detect any hint of the woman I'd thought I married. Hi, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Kyle, I'm so glad I caught you. How are the girls? They're fine, at school. Good, good. Listen, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I really believe this break is exactly what we needed. I feel like I'm seeing everything so clearly now. I'm sure you are. There's something I need to tell you, though. I've decided to extend the trip by a few days. Troy has some business opportunities he wants to discuss with me, and I think it could be really good for our financial future. Business opportunities. She was actually going to try to recruit me into whatever criminal enterprise she'd gotten involved with. What kind of business opportunities? Investment stuff, real estate development in Nevada. It's complicated, but the potential returns are incredible. I closed my eyes, wondering how many lies she'd told over the past few months, how many times she'd looked me in the eye and fabricated entire conversations. Emily, we need to talk when you get back. Of course. That's the whole point of this trip, so we can have real conversations about our future. I love you, Kyle. I know this is hard, but I really believe we're going to be stronger than ever. After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the family photos on the refrigerator. In every picture, Emily looked happy, genuine, like the kind of mother and wife who would never risk her family's safety for money and excitement. But people weren't always who they appeared to be, and sometimes the people closest to you were the ones capable of the greatest betrayal. Derek arrived that evening with a thick folder of documentation and a grim expression. "It's worse than we thought," he said, spreading papers across my dining room table. "Troy Baxter has been arrested twice in the past 5 years for fraud. Both times the charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. But the pattern is clear. He targets women with assets and connections, uses them to facilitate illegal activities, then disappears when things get too hot. What about Emily? How deep is she in this?" "Deep enough that walking away isn't going to be simple." Derek showed me bank records he'd somehow obtained through his network of contacts. "She's been moving money through multiple accounts, some of them offshore. The IRS is going to be very interested in her tax returns for the past 2 years." I studied the documents, seeing a financial trail that painted Emily as either a criminal mastermind or a useful idiot. Given what I knew about her personality, I suspected she was closer to the latter. "Derek, what happens if I report this to the authorities?" "Emily gets arrested, probably within a week. Troy and his associates either disappear or lawyer up. Your daughters lose their mother, at least temporarily. Your family's finances get frozen while the government sorts through everything, and you become a single father dealing with a media circus. And if I don't report it, Emily comes home, probably tries to involve you in whatever scheme they're running. When it inevitably falls apart, and it will fall apart, you become an accessory after the fact. Your daughters lose both parents, and you spend the next decade trying to rebuild your life from prison." Neither option was acceptable, but Derek was right about one thing. I had to protect Sophie and Jenna first, worry about everything else second. "There's a third option," Derek said quietly. "We confront Emily directly, give her a chance to extricate herself from this situation before it gets worse." "You think she'd listen?" "I think she's in over her head and probably scared. Troy and his people aren't the kind of criminals who let their associates retire gracefully. Emily might be looking for a way out and not know how to ask for help." It was possible. The Emily I'd married had always been ambitious, but she'd also been fundamentally decent. If she understood the true consequences of what she'd gotten involved with, she might be willing to cooperate with authorities in exchange for leniency. When does she get back? Tomorrow afternoon, according to her last text. "Then we confront her tomorrow night, after the girls are in bed." Derek nodded. "Kyle, you need to be prepared for the possibility that she won't cooperate. If Emily has gone this far down the rabbit hole, she might not be willing to climb back out. Then we'll deal with that when it happens." The next day passed in a haze of normal activities that felt anything but normal. I took Sophie and Jenna to school, went to work, picked them up, helped with homework, made dinner. But underneath the routine, I was preparing for a conversation that would determine the future of our family. Emily arrived home at 6:30, looking tanned and relaxed, carrying gifts for the girls, and acting like she'd been at a spa retreat rather than running illegal gambling operations in Las Vegas. "Daddy, look what Mom brought me!" Jenna ran into the kitchen carrying a stuffed animal shaped like a showgirl. The irony was almost too much to bear. "That's great, sweetheart." Emily kissed me on the cheek, a gesture that felt like a performance. "You look tired," she said. "Have you been sleeping okay?" "I've had a lot on my mind." "Well, that's what tonight is for. We're going to talk about everything, get it all out in the open." She had no idea how prophetic those words were. After dinner, after baths and bedtime stories and the normal chaos of putting 2 children to bed, Emily and I sat in our living room like actors preparing for the most important performance of our lives. "So," she said, curling up on the couch with a glass of wine, "I know this has been hard for you, but I really think—" "Emily, stop." I looked at her directly, seeing the woman I'd loved for over a decade and the stranger she'd become. "I know about Troy. I know about the gambling. I know about the videos. I know about all of it." The wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. Emily stared at the broken glass for a long moment, and I watched her face cycle through emotions like a slot machine. Shock, fear, anger, and finally, a kind of resigned calculation that told me everything I needed to know about who she'd become. "I don't know what you think you know," she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. "I know that you and Troy have been running private poker games for tourists in Vegas. I know that you've been making adult videos and selling them online. I know that Troy Baxter is a professional con artist with connections to organized crime. And I know that you've been laundering money through offshore accounts that the IRS is going to be very interested in." Emily's face went pale. "Kyle, you don't understand." "Then explain it to me." I leaned forward, giving her the chance Derek had suggested. "Explain how the woman I married, the mother of my children, got involved with criminals. Explain how you justified risking our family's future for money." For a moment, I thought she might break down, might revert to the Emily I'd fallen in love with, and beg for help getting out of the situation she'd created. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and looked at me with something approaching defiance. "You want to know how this started? It started with you, Kyle. It started with 8 years of feeling invisible in my own marriage. 8 years of watching you care more about your computers than your wife. 8 years of being taken for granted while you assumed I'd just be content playing house in suburbia forever. So you decided to commit crimes?" "I decided to live my life." Emily stood up, stepping around the broken glass, her voice rising. "Do you know what it's like to be married to someone who thinks ambition means getting promoted to senior systems administrator? Do you know what it's like to feel like you're dying inside while everyone around you thinks you should be grateful for your perfect little life? Emily, we have 2 daughters. Don't you dare use Sophie and Jenna as weapons against me. Everything I've done has been for this family. Do you think your salary is enough to give them the life they deserve? Do you think they're going to thank us for being so responsible and boring when they can't afford college?" I stared at her, realizing that she genuinely believed what she was saying. In her mind, she justified criminal activity as family sacrifice, transformed infidelity into self-actualization, and convinced herself that the sufferers of her cons somehow deserved to be cheated. "Emily, you're going to prison. You understand that, right? When this all comes out, and it will come out, you're going to be arrested. What happens to the girls then?" She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "You still don't get it, do you? Troy has connections, Kyle. Real connections. People who can make problems disappear, who can create new identities, who can set us up with a life you never could have provided. Us? I want you to come with me. All of us. You, me, the girls. Troy has a job for you, something that uses your computer skills. We could be in the Cayman Islands by next month, living like actual millionaires instead of pretending to be middle class." I felt like I was talking to a stranger who happened to look like my wife. "Emily, these people aren't your friends. They're using you. When this operation gets shut down, and it will get shut down, they'll disappear and leave you holding the bag." "You're wrong." But her voice wavered slightly. "Troy loves me. He's shown me what life could be like if we just had the courage to take it. Troy is a criminal who's been arrested twice for fraud. He targets women like you, uses them until they're no longer useful, then moves on to the next mark." Emily's face flushed with anger. "How dare you investigate me like I'm some kind of criminal? How dare you spy on me and violate my privacy? You're my wife. You're the mother of my children. When you started committing crimes that could destroy our family, it became my business." We stared at each other across the living room. 8 years of marriage reduced to this moment of complete incompatibility. I could see in her eyes that she'd made her choice, and it wasn't us. "I'm leaving," she said quietly. "Tonight. I'm going back to Vegas, and I'm not coming back." "What about Sophie and Jenna?" "They can visit. When we get settled, when everything is secure, they can come live with us if they want." "Emily, you're talking about abduction. I'm talking about giving my daughters a better life than the one you can provide." That's when I knew the conversation was over. The Emily I'd married was gone, replaced by someone who could look at criminal activity and see opportunity, who could abandon her children and call it sacrifice. "If you leave tonight," I said, "I'm calling the FBI in the morning. I'll give them everything I know about you and Troy and your entire operation." Emily smiled, but it was cold and calculating. "No, you won't, because if you do, I'll tell them you were involved from the beginning. I'll tell them the offshore accounts were your idea, that you helped set up the money laundering operation. Who do you think they'll believe? The grieving wife whose husband destroyed their family, or the bitter ex-husband trying to get revenge?" I realized then that Derek had been wrong about one thing. Emily wasn't in over her head. She was exactly where she wanted to be. She'd planned for this contingency, prepared to destroy me if I tried to stop her. "You'd really do that? You'd send me to prison and leave our daughters orphans?" "I'd do whatever it takes to protect my future." Emily went upstairs to pack, and I sat in the living room staring at the broken wine glass, wondering how I'd so completely misjudged the person I'd shared my life with. 20 minutes later, she came back down with 2 suitcases and her laptop bag. "Tell the girls I had to go back to work. I'll call them tomorrow." "Emily, don't do this. Whatever you think Troy has promised you, it's not going to work out the way you imagine." She paused at the front door. "Kyle, you're a good man. You're a good father. But you're not enough for me, and you never were." "I'm sorry it took me so long to admit that." Then she was gone, and I was alone in a house that had been our home, surrounded by the debris of a marriage that had apparently been failing for years without my knowledge. I called Derek. "She's gone," I said when he answered, "and she threatened to frame me if I report her to the authorities. Can she do that?" "I don't know. But Derek, there's something else. She wanted me to join them, said Troy had a job for me in the Cayman Islands. This isn't just about Emily having an affair. They're planning something bigger." Derek was quiet for a moment. "Kyle, pack some clothes for you and the girls. You're staying at my place tonight." "Why?" "Because if Emily is desperate enough to threaten you, she's desperate enough to do something stupid. And if Troy's people think you're a loose end, your house isn't safe." I looked around the living room at the family photos and children's artwork, at the life Emily and I had built together over 8 years. In one evening, all of it had become evidence of a lie I'd been living without knowing it. "Kyle?" Derek's voice brought me back to the present. "Yeah, we'll be there in an hour." I went upstairs to wake my daughters and tell them we were having a sleepover at Uncle Derek's house. Sophie, always too perceptive, asked where Mom was. "She had to go back to work," I said, using Emily's suggested lie because I couldn't think of anything better. As I packed clothes for the 3 of us, I realized that Emily had been right about one thing. Our old life was over. But she'd been wrong about everything else. Whatever came next, I was going to make sure Sophie and Jenna were protected, even if it meant sacrificing everything else. 3 days later, Emily called while the girls were at school. I was at Derek's house working remotely while trying to figure out how to rebuild a life that had been completely upended. When I saw her name on my phone, I almost didn't answer. "Kyle, we need to talk." "I thought we said everything we needed to say." "Things have changed?" Her voice sounded different, strained, maybe even scared. "I need to see you. Tonight." "Emily, I'm not playing games anymore. If you want to see the girls, we can arrange supervised visits through a lawyer." "This isn't about the girls. This is about the information you have. Troy knows you've been investigating us." I felt a chill run down my spine. "How does he know that?" "It doesn't matter how. What matters is that he wants to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "Meet me tonight at the Starbucks on Preston Road. Come alone. 1 hour just to talk." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone, wondering if Emily was trying to help me or trap me. Given everything that had happened, I wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. Derek found me sitting at his kitchen table an hour later, staring at my untouched coffee. "She wants to meet," I told him about the phone call. "Absolutely not. It's obviously a trap." "Maybe. Or maybe she's finally realized how much trouble she's in and wants to find a way out." "Kyle, these people aren't negotiating from a position of weakness. If they know you've been investigating them, they see you as a threat." Derek was probably right, but I kept thinking about the tone of Emily's voice. She'd sounded genuinely frightened, not calculating or manipulative like she'd been 3 nights ago. What if I wear a wire? What if we set up surveillance? What if they eliminate you in a coffee shop parking lot and make it look like a robbery? It was a fair point, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting was important. Emily had said things had changed, and I needed to know what that meant. "Derek, I have to go. If there's even a chance that Emily wants to cooperate, I need to take it. Then we do this right." Derek stood up, already reaching for his phone. "I'll have backup in place, surveillance on the location, and a tracking device on your car. But Kyle, if this goes sideways, promise me you'll run." That evening, I drove to the Starbucks feeling like I was heading into the most important meeting of my life. Derek had 3 former police colleagues positioned around the shopping center, and I was wearing a wire that would record everything Emily said. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with her back to the wall. She looked terrible, exhausted, nervous, constantly checking the door like she was expecting trouble. "Thank you for coming," she said when I sat down across from her. "Emily, what's going on? You look like you haven't slept in days." "I haven't?" She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like she was trying to warm herself. "Kyle, I think I made a terrible mistake." "Which mistake? The affair, the crimes, or threatening to frame me?" "All of it." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Troy isn't who I thought he was. The people he works with, they're dangerous, really dangerous. I tried to tell you that. I know, I should have listened." She looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw the woman I'd married. "Kyle, they want me to recruit you. They want you to use your computer skills to help them hack into casino security systems. And if I refuse, they'll hurt the girls." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Emily, what have you done?" "I panicked. When Troy found out you'd been investigating us, he said we needed to bring you into the operation or eliminate the threat you represent. I told him you'd never cooperate unless they had leverage." "So you gave them our daughters as leverage?" "I thought I was protecting you!" Emily's voice cracked. "I thought if they believed you'd cooperate to protect Sophie and Jenna, they'd leave you alone long enough for me to figure out how to get us all out of this." I stared at my wife across the table, trying to process the magnitude of what she'd done. In trying to protect me, she'd made our children targets of professional criminals. "Emily, where are the girls right now?" "They're safe. They're at Derek's house with police protection." "But Kyle, that won't last forever. These people have resources, connections. If they want to get to Sophie and Jenna, they will." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we give them what they want. You help them with this one job, we take our share of the money, and then we disappear. All of us. You want me to become a criminal to protect our family from criminals. I want you to do whatever it takes to keep our daughters safe." I looked at Emily, seeing the desperation in her eyes, the fear that had finally made her realize the consequences of her choices. But I also saw something else. She was still trying to manipulate me, still trying to get me to join her criminal enterprise. "Emily, there's something you need to know. I've already contacted the FBI." Her face went white. "Kyle, no. You don't understand what you've done." "I understand perfectly. I've given them everything I know about Troy's operation, including the evidence Derek and I gathered in Vegas. They're planning to shut down the entire network." "When?" "Tomorrow night. They're going to arrest everyone involved, including you." Emily stared at me for a long moment, and I watched her face cycle through emotions: fear, anger, betrayal, and finally, a kind of resigned acceptance. "You're really going to let them arrest me?" "I'm going to let them arrest the woman who threatened to frame me, who put our children in danger, and who chose criminals over her family." "And what happens to Sophie and Jenna when their mother goes to prison?" "They'll be safe. They'll be with me, living a normal life, without the constant threat of violence from your criminal associates." Emily stood up abruptly. "Kyle, you have no idea what you've just done. Troy won't let this happen. He'll come after you, after the girls, after everyone involved in shutting down his operation. Let him try. The FBI will be watching. The FBI can't watch you forever." Emily walked away without another word, leaving me sitting alone in the coffee shop, wondering if I'd just saved my family or doomed them. Through the window, I watched her get into a car I didn't recognize, probably Troy's, probably with him waiting inside. I touched the wire under my shirt, knowing that Derek and his team had recorded everything. Emily had just confessed to conspiracy, confirmed the details of Troy's criminal operation, and admitted that they'd threatened my children. It was more than enough evidence to ensure convictions for everyone involved. But as I drove back to Derek's house, I couldn't shake Emily's final warning. Professional criminals didn't usually go quietly, and Troy had already shown that he was willing to target innocent people to protect his operation. Derek met me at the door with a grim expression. "We got everything," he said. "The FBI is moving up their timeline. They're making arrests tonight." "What about Emily?" "She'll be arrested along with everyone else." "Kyle, I'm sorry, but there's no way around it." I nodded, having accepted that reality days ago. "What about the girls?" "They're upstairs doing homework. They don't know anything about what's happening." "Derek, Emily warned me that Troy won't go quietly. She thinks he'll come after us, even after he's arrested." Then, we'll be ready for him. That night, I lay awake in Derek's guest room, listening to my daughters sleep peacefully in the next room, and wondering what our lives would look like when this was all over. Emily would go to prison, probably for several years. Sophie and Jenna would grow up with a father who'd helped send their mother to jail. And somewhere out there, Troy Baxter and his criminal associates were either in custody or planning revenge. At 3 in the morning, Derek woke me with news that the FBI operation had been a complete success. 12 people had been arrested, including Emily and Troy. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash and assets had been seized, and the entire criminal network had been dismantled. "It's over," Derek said. "You and the girls are safe." But as I looked out the window at the quiet suburban street, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a different kind of challenge. Emily was gone, probably forever, and I was now a single father trying to explain to 2 little girls why their mother wasn't coming home. The next morning, I sat Sophie and Jenna down for the most difficult conversation of my life. "Girls, I need to tell you something about Mom." Sophie, always perceptive, looked at me with eyes that seemed older than her 10 years. "She's not coming back, is she?" "No, sweetheart, she's not." "Did she do something bad?" I thought about how to answer that question honestly without destroying their image of their mother entirely. "She made some very poor choices, and now she has to face the consequences of those choices." Jenna, my 8-year-old optimist, asked, "But she still loves us, right?" "Yes," I said, because despite everything Emily had done, I believe that was true. "She still loves you both very much." As I held my daughters and let them cry for the mother they'd lost, I realized that Emily had been wrong about everything except one thing. Our old life was indeed over. But the new life we were building, just the 3 of us, was going to be honest, safe, and filled with the kind of love that didn't require lies or manipulation or criminal activity to sustain it. 6 months later, the divorce was final. Emily was serving a 5-year sentence in federal prison. And Sophie, Jenna, and I had settled into a routine that felt surprisingly normal. We'd moved to a new house in a different suburb. The girls were thriving in their new schools, and I'd been promoted at work. Apparently, helping the FBI dismantle a criminal network had impressed my employers. Emily wrote letters to the girls occasionally, carefully monitored by prison officials. In them, she talked about how sorry she was, how much she missed them, and how she hoped they could forgive her someday. She never mentioned Troy, never tried to justify her actions, and never asked them to visit. I kept the letters in a box in my closet, thinking that someday, when Sophie and Jenna were older, they might want to read them and decide for themselves whether their mother deserved forgiveness. But that was a decision for the future. For now, we were just a family of 3, building a life based on honesty, trust, and the kind of love that didn't require anyone to sacrifice their integrity or safety. And that, I realized, was more than enough.